Sam, that is Sam Rayner, co-host of this podcast, and I, that is Tom Rayner, the other co-host of this podcast, got an email yesterday as we are recording this, and the email was about a group of churches. And basically, the email said 1/3 of this group of churches, association of churches, either have no pastor, have closed down, or they're in an interim status. In other words, 1/3 of them do not have a pastor one way or the other. We're reaching, I don't think I'm overstating it, Sam, to say we're getting pretty close to a crisis point on pastoral availability. Is that fair?
Getting there. I don't know that I'm going to say full-on crisis just yet, but you can see it coming. And the email that you're talking about, which was forwarded to us, there was a level of urgency in that. And, it's hard to read tone in email, right? But you could tell that the person sending this had a level of urgency. It was a problem for them, and I do think that this problem is going to continue to increase. So it's not like we're going to all wake up one day and just be in a crisis mode. If you're halfway paying attention, you will start feeling the pressure more and more and more over time.
Well, we're going to talk about pastoral tenure. That's not just about pastoral availability, but it's closely related. Before we do, we always have Tyndale as our sponsor. And I love it when they introduce to us another resource. They have tons of resources, of course, but a resource to us that we can talk about on Rayner on Leadership. This one is the NLT Student Life Application Study Bible. And guess what, Sam? It's Filament Enabled Edition. You love that Filament Enabled Edition.
At this point, everyone probably knows. Yes, it's such an innovation. It's such an incredible innovation, and I think Tyndale's done an incredible job with it. I love the New Living Translation; it's my favorite translation. The Filament Enabled Anything is great, but I'm glad to see that this is geared towards students. That's awesome.
Yeah, and just a reminder to our listeners and viewers, this Filament Enabled is you download an app, you point the app at the page, and it gives you all kinds of notes, all kinds of commentary, all kinds of resources. They have this in several Bibles. We've been talking about the Journaling Bible, but now we're talking about Student Life Application Study Bible. Very popular Bible, a Bible that has been used by students and student ministries just by so many. It's been unbelievable, the reach of it. So it comes equipped now with Filament Bible App to help you go further in your reading and study of the Bible for the Student Life Study Bible. So now you have 27,000 on-page and in-app notes, over 350 maps, infographics, illustrations, and much, much more. So if you want to find out more, now we've got it in the show notes in case you don't get these letters, SLASB.com. SLASB.com. That stands for Student Life Application Study Bible.com. But you can read it in the show notes, and it's going to invite readers to even a deeper knowledge of God's Word. And it's going to invite students to do that. Great for student ministry. It's in the NLT. We love the NLT. It's clarity and how accurate it is. And this study Bible is equipped with a Filament Bible app, enabling you to go further in your study. Once again, look at the show notes and let's look at what God is doing in our student ministries. Sam, let's talk about tenure. Where do we begin?
Well, I think we can start by saying that tenure is increasing, and that may surprise some people. I think this narrative of short tenures has been out there for quite some time, probably 3 decades, that pastoral tenure is short. But because pastors are getting older, on average,
yes,
tenure is increasing. So it's like, well, that's good. We've had too short a tenure. I'd say, yes, it is a good thing that overall tenure is increasing. But the reason behind it is because these are pastors that are nearing retirement age and they're not likely to move.
Well, I'm going to be a little more blunt than that because I can speak for my old people. These are my people. I am never going to question the call of God on any pastor's life, so hear me clearly on that. But God uses a lot of circumstances to call us there, away, etc. And one of the things that he does is economic reality. And here's the economic reality. Once someone gets 55 or older, the opportunities to go to another church diminish greatly. That is just a factual reality. And so we had a lot of baby boomers in that age range. I'm in the middle of the baby boom. I'm 67 years old, born in 1955. And so we got a lot of boomers who cannot leave. And so they are at those churches. And since they cannot leave, tenure is increasing. So I'm going to speak a little more bluntly about my generation. They don't have many of them don't have other places to go.
Well, and yes, you're right. And this is one of those double-edged sword kind of stats. A pastoral tenure of 3 years is not good if that's the average. I mean, you can do good in 3 years, and I'm sure there's plenty of stories of people out there who say, I was there for 3 years, it was great. But generally speaking, if that's the norm, it's just hard to get anything done. It's hard to really shepherd during that, during such a short time frame. That being said, it is alarming. And hey, it's great that we have baby boomer pastors. It's great that they're going to stay at a church through retirement. All those are good things. The problem is there's just not a whole lot of younger people behind them. And
that's right.
There's a lack of pastors available. We'll get to that here more in a second because that's our fourth point. But let's jump right into the second point. A significant number of pastors left during or shortly after the pandemic. And you and I saw this of pastors who were planning a retirement but decided to retire early, or got the church through the pandemic and said, you know what, I did what I was supposed to do. I got them through the rough stuff. I think it's time. And they left earlier than anticipated.
The pandemic was kind of like a major building program. A major building program exhausts many pastors, and they feel like they don't have anything left. And so many pastors, we saw this for years and years and years after the building program was over, they just said, it's time to move on. I've exhausted my visionary leadership here. Well, the pandemic was exhausting, and it was not the productive thing of like a building program was. And pastors came out of this and they said, especially the boomers, I was thinking of waiting until I was 70 to retire. 65 is good. I'm gone. And I'm going to do some other ministry right now. So on the one hand, we have tenure increasing particularly because older pastors are sticking around on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have a significant number of pastors that left right after the pandemic. And Sam, that email that we got was indicative, and it exemplified exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. And what was surprising to me, well, it wasn't surprising, but it hadn't hit me yet, was in the email, it talked about how the person who sent it, and again, the person who sent it was trying to do good. Like, this is somebody who's just trying to help churches. So I want to make that clear. So-and-so retired, but they're available for pulpit supply. And so that repeated. And I had this thought, I'm like, a lot of these churches in this area are just going to swap retired pastors. One's going to retire at a church, and then they're going to go do pulpit supply at Interim at the church down the road, and then the pastor retired at that church, they're just going to go do pulpit supply at that other church down the road, and they're just going to swap out. And you're going to see a lot of that. And again, hey, if you're a baby boomer and you're entering into retirement age and you want to do interim work, that's great. We actually have Interim Pastor University at Church Answers to help train people to do this. So that's a good thing. The downside is a lot of these churches are not going to get the pastor that they need because they're going to be complacent, and you're going to see a lot of swapping around, and it's only going to prolong the problem.
Exactly. By the way, you mentioned Interim Pastor. I know that was not planned. We'll ask Alana to put interimpastors.university in the show notes. So if anybody's interested in becoming certified as Interim Pastor, sounds like they're going to be a lot of them, and it'd be good to get this certification. So I'm glad you mentioned it. Here's something else going to happen. Bivocational pastors will have longer tenures. Typical, this may be stereotypical more than typical, but I'm going to just put it out there. Typical bivocational pastors, in many cases, their goal was to get away from being bivocational. In the past, the goal was, I want to become full-time compensated pastor. I'm working full-time hours. I want to become a full-time compensated pastor. Those desires still exist out there. However, there are a number of people who are going into ministry wanting to stay in at least two vocations. We call that co-vocational. There's a slight distinction between I have to or I want to, but it's really very similar. And so more and more people are going into this bivo or covo ministry with plans to stay like that, so they will stay longer. You're probably going to see some longer tenured bivocational and covocational pastors as well.
Yeah, give us more bivocational, covocational pastors. I think it's a great model of ministry. I'm biased because I'm covocational. I've been bivocational. I've been full-time as well. And I just think that this is a very good model for churches. Over half of our staff at West Bradenton is covo or bivo. And it's hard, no doubt. The scope of this podcast, we can't talk about all the downsides of bivocational ministry. It is difficult. But I do believe that it is hugely beneficial to the church. And more times than not, it can be very good for the church. Obviously, you don't want churches holding back if they could pay full time, but they don't want to. So they've got somebody that they're just not paying like they should. But generally speaking, I love bivocational models. I think that longer tenures for bivocational pastors is a good thing. And I think that we should welcome it.
I totally agree. And since we did mention, we're going to put the other certification in there. Since we did mention Interim Pastor University, we'll talk about our bivocational certification training as well. So we'll put that in. We'll put that in the show notes. Two good certifications. Again, not planned, but since we're talking about it, we will do so. And yes, Sam, your first church, you were bivocational, the Church of First Herbie. Then you went to become a full-time church, full-time, and then you're in a larger church right now. But by choice of you and the church, you're co-vocational. So you've been bivo, and then you've been full-time, and now you are covo. You've been the path.
I'm loving my life. I really enjoy being co-vocational. I'm very grateful to West Bradenton for allowing me to do that. Now, let's jump into this fourth point, because this certainly affects pastoral tenure. There's going to be a lack of availability of pastors. There's a paucity effect, if you will. We use the word that I think you wrote in these notes right here.
I did. I love paucity. It's one of my favorite words.
It's a good word. It's a word that's not often used. And if you were checking the work with Grammarly, which is another good tool that doesn't sponsor the show or anything, I just like it. It probably says this is a word, might want to change this word because it's not used often. But I think overruling the Grammarly there is a good thing, because it is a good word. Paucity. There's a short factor. There's a lack of available pastors, and that's going to affect tenure. It means tenure is going to get longer, and we kind of mentioned that in the first point. But it doesn't just apply to older pastors. It's going to apply to younger pastors as well. And something we've talked about with Josh on the EST podcast, where some churches are going to figure this out. And we want to keep our pastor. Some smarter, savvier churches are going to start doing what they can to keep pastors, knowing that there's a lack of availability. And if you're listening to this and you're a church member, just realize that if you have a good pastor, you had better do everything you can to hang on to them, because if you let them go, or if they go, and you could have prevented it, you're going to find that there aren't as many pastors out there. This also goes into what churches want out of a pastor. Meaning, let's say you have a baby boomer pastor, done a good job, 30 years, and baby boomer pastor retires. Well, you're not going to get an idealized version of that pastor that just happens to be 35, 40 years old. Mm-hmm. That person doesn't exist anymore. It's a different generation now. So not only is there a lack of availability of pastors, there is expectations of many churches that are going to be unreasonable. And you combine those two factors, there's a paucity effect. The churches that figure this out are, that love their pastors, want to keep them. They're going to do everything they can to keep them. And that just means that there's just going to be more and more availability out there of positions that need to be filled.
I want to make a parenthetical comment, and I could use another metaphor. I could use a metaphor like I want to go down a trail that is not exactly tied to pastoral tenure, but because it happened today at the moment we're recording this, and we're talking about make sure you do things right as a church for your pastor, I'm going to go down the trail of pastor search committee for just a moment. As you are looking for a pastor, So information came in to, I believe it was at info at Church Answers. One of our team members forwarded me 3 questions from someone on a search committee. Question number 3 was this. Now get ready for this. There were a few statements before the question. We have had several pastors preach. In other words, what we've called the beauty contest. They've just had several prospective pastors come through. Problem number 1. We think that 2 of them are probably more popular than the others, but it seems like it is split 50-50, or we at least perceive it so. We are thinking of going to a ballot where they can choose either one of the 2 and have 2 prospective pastors on the ballot and a vote. Sam, I don't think I've heard this before, but it happened today. And I sent the message back, tell them one word, no, and put about 25 exclamation points by that. And then I added some detail to that.
Oh, man. That is a disaster of disasters. I've not heard of that being done before. I think it's atrocious. Maybe some people who have good intentions are trying to do something there, but that is bad. And if I was one of those 2 candidates, I would be like, just scratch my name off that list. I don't want anything to do with this.
Just think you come into the church and there's 40 to 50% of the members who voted for the other guy. You say, how are you doing? If they even stay in the church after their guy didn't get it.
Well, here's the thing. Churches that vote, I mean, the people that are voting, we've talked about this before, but they don't know the person. So it really is just a beauty contest. And it's literally people sitting in the audience going, well, I don't know, I guess this one seems good.
Based on one Sunday.
Oh, man. You talk about setting everybody up for failure and for heartache. That is one of the worst cases that I've ever heard of. I would love to do a follow-up on that. If the church goes through with it, I would love to revisit that church in about 3 months and say, what's going on now?
Well, Jano and our team has all the information, so we may actually contact that church and see what happened. It was
I'll do
random
it.
Yeah.
Listen, if nobody else on the team wants to, I will, because I'm going to be like, Church of the Morons, how are you guys doing with this?
Oh gosh, I thought you were saying Mormons, but you didn't. You didn't.
No. And that may be a bit harsh because I'm sure there's good.
It's just a bit harsh, yeah. But I have never seen that. We've been doing this a long time. I mean, you're almost a 43-year-old man. As a matter of fact, on this air date, you'll be 43 in 2 days beyond this air date.
All right.
And so. In your 43 years and my 67 years, we've never have seen, let's have candidates up there, choose 2 and pick one.
Oh, man.
Well, okay, let's get back to
choose your tie wisely that day.
Okay, let's get back to pastoral tenure. I just wanted, you brought up the issue of making certain that you're doing the right thing by pastors. Well, that's how you bring them in as well. So
absolutely,
tenure is going to be short if they do that. One of the one that wins loses. Okay, this last point that I want to talk about. We used to talk about the 5-year test. The 5-year test was if you make it in a church for 5 years, then you are accepted as the pastor. It was. There's nothing scientific about it. It's basically, this is what we hear from pastors. This is what we hear from churches. It takes you 5 years in most churches to be accepted as a pastor. I'm suggesting this may become a 7-year test because of COVID. We went through 1 year where you did not meet, and then the next year where you're trying to regather. So now this acceptance phase where you become truly the pastor may be as long as 7 years in the tenure. And if pastors realize that, they may see their best years 7 years out.
I completely agree. So I think I'm a perfect example of this. I've been at West Bradenton now for 7.5 years, but 2 of those years were COVID. And basically, I'm at year 5.
Yes.
In the old way of thinking, I'm at year 5 because the 2 years of COVID kind of just added, an additional, time, an additional length of time to the acceptance factor. Now, if you're just now going to a church, you might be 5 years.
That's true.
Or 6.
That's true.
So if you're brand new at a church and you're coming in post-COVID, this will likely shrink back down to 5 years. But if you're at year 3 or 4, hear us very clearly. You're really at like year 1 or 2 because of COVID. And I do think that this 5-year time frame has lengthened, and the pastor that you follow also has a lot to say about this. If you're following a long tenured pastor, 30 years, this stretches out longer. If you're following a bunch of short tenured pastors, it could be 4 years even. I don't think it's going to be 3 and you're accepted. It's hard. It's very hard sociologically for that to happen. But 5 to 7 years, I think, is the norm. And I think more on the 7 side because of COVID of late.
I think all of those. So the thesis of this podcast on the updates on pastoral tenure really has been more about tenure increasing. We've given a lot of different things on updates. We've talked about pastoral tenure more than one time on the podcast, but our update has been affected by the boomers, has been affected by COVID, it's been affected by the acceptance of co-vocational pastors and bivocational pastors. So there's a lot of things at play, and we wanted to share those things so that we could talk about tenure with all the new and relevant information. Speaking of new, they're not new, but they're new back to us. Smart Church Solutions, Sam. Great to have them again as our sponsor.
Yeah, it's great to have Smart Church Solutions. They've sponsored us before. We obviously love all that they put out there. Great company. Tim Cool and his crew doing an awesome job. They have this emergency preparedness handbook. And you really need to go get it. It's free. So super easy. We've got a link in the show notes. There's several reasons why security is critical. First and foremost, it helps to prevent potential harm to individuals on your property. And, a lot of churches don't think about this. Somebody breaks the arm, something happens, insurance, all that stuff. Well, what do you do about that? Security is an important issue for maintaining the integrity and reputation of the church. It only takes one newspaper article to kind of ruin things for you. Well, don't let that happen to you. Go to Smart Church Solutions and get this free gift for your church so that you can be ready. This is emergency preparedness. So you can download that resource for free. Again, if you're at your computer, show notes, or smartchurchsolutions.com/security. So smartchurchsolutions.com/security. We love what they do at Smart Church Solutions. Very glad for them to be sponsoring the show again. And thank you for listening again. We appreciate our listeners. We love our listeners. Rate, if you like us, rate, review, and subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button. It helps the algorithms. We want to please the algorithms. So help us out. And more than anything else, just thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.